Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder if a piece of art on a wall could actually be teaching us about important global goals? Well, today we're diving into some fascinating research that looks at street art and its surprising connection to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. Imagine walking down the street and seeing a vibrant mural. It might make you feel something, think about something, or maybe even inspire you. This research basically asks if these amazing public artworks can also communicate something as big and important as the world's goals for a better future. The United Nations has these 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, which are like a global to-do list for things like ending poverty, fighting climate change, and ensuring good health and education for everyone. These goals are super broad and interconnected, which makes them a perfect lens to look at complex things like art. So, the big question here is, can street art, these often spontaneous and publicly displayed artworks, be seen as speaking to these global goals? And if so, how do people, and even experts, agree on which goals the art represents? The researchers here used a huge dataset of 556 street art images called the Street Art for Sustainability dataset. They wanted to see how well these images matched up with all 17 SDGs. They did two main studies to figure this out. In study 1, they got a lot of everyday people, 262 of them, to look at a bunch of these street art images and tell them which of the 17 SDGs they thought each image represented. It was a check all that apply kind of situation because, let's be honest, art can mean a lot of things to different people. Each person only saw about 40 images to avoid getting too tired. These participants were mostly recruited online. They were given a quick rundown of what each SDG was about before they started rating the images. It is important to note that most of these people didn't know the artworks beforehand, and about half of them were also pretty new to the SDGs themselves. This means they were giving their honest first impressions. And what did they find? Well, the participants were pretty generous with their SDG attributions. On average, they linked each artwork to about 9 different SDGs. That is more than half of them for every single image. This tells us that people saw a lot of overlapping themes in these artworks. They weren't just seeing one thing, they were seeing many layers of meaning. Looking at which SDGs were picked the most, it was things like SDG 10 Reduced Inequalities, South Dakota G16 Peace Justice and Strong Institutions, and SDG 11 Sustainable Cities and Communities. These seem to be themes that street art often touches upon. On the other hand, goals like SDG 7 Affordable and Clean Energy, South Dakota G9 Industry Innovation and Infrastructure, and SDG 6 Clean Water and Sanitation were picked the least often by the general public. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Even though people saw a lot of SDGs in each artwork, the agreement between any two people wasn't super high. They used some fancy statistical tools to measure this. And the results showed that while there was some overlap, people rarely agreed on the exact same set of SDGs for a single artwork. It is like everyone saw the potential for many goals. But they each picked a slightly different combination. But the good news is the agreement was still better than just random guessing. They calculated a special number called boot match reliability, and it showed that people were systematically picking certain SDGs together, even if they didn't pick the exact same set as someone else. So, there is a pattern, but it is a bit fuzzy, which is probably normal when interpreting art. Then, they looked at how these SDGs tended to show up together. They created networks where each SDG was a point, and a line between 2 points showed how often they were picked for the same artwork. In study 1, with the general public, they found 2 main groups, or clusters. One cluster was mostly about social stuff like poverty, health, and equality. The other cluster was more about the environment and how we live, like clean energy, cities, and climate action. It seems like people naturally grouped the SDGs in a way that made sense to them when looking at art. For example, things like inequality and peace often went together, and so did things like climate action and protecting nature. Now, to get a clearer picture and see if experts agreed more, they did study 2. This time, they had 3 trained coders, who are authors of the paper, look at all 556 artworks. These coders were more familiar with the SDGs and had more time to analyze each piece. And guess what? The coders agreed with each other much more than the general public did in study 1. Their ratings were more reliable, meaning they were more likely to assign the same SDGs to the same artwork. The coders also tended to see fewer SDGs per artwork compared to the general public. While participants saw an average of over 9 SDGs per image, the coders saw closer to 3. This suggests experts are more focused and selective in their interpretations. For the coders, South Dakota G10 Reduced Inequalities was still a big one, followed by SDG 15 Life on Land and SDG 16 Peace Justice and Strong Institutions. The least picked goals were similar to Study 1, like SDG 9 Industry Innovation and Infrastructure, South Dakota G6 Clean Water and Sanitation, and SDG 7 Affordable and Clean Energy. The agreement scores for the coders were way higher. This shows that when you have people who understand the SDG framework well and have time to analyze, they can reach a pretty solid consensus on which goals an artwork might be representing. Interestingly, the coders' network analysis also revealed the structure, but it was a bit different. They found three main groups: a social group like equality, peace, and health, an environmental group like climate, water, and land, and a distinct economic group like work, industry, and sustainable cities. This is a more traditional way of looking at the SDGs. This means the experts were able to separate out economic themes more clearly than the general public did in their initial impressions. So, what does all this mean? Well, it tells us a few important things. First, street art really does seem to have the potential to communicate themes related to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. People, whether they are everyday viewers or trained experts, can find these connections. The difference between the general public and the experts is quite telling. The public, with their first impressions and less formal understanding, saw a broader range of SDGs in each artwork. They were more open to multiple interpretations. The experts, on the other hand, were more focused, seeing fewer SDGs per artwork but agreeing on them more consistently. This suggests that the public's interpretation might capture the sheer potential for meaning in street art, while experts can identify the most prominent and likely intended messages. The lower agreement among the public makes sense because art is subjective, but the fact that they still showed some consistent patterns better than random chance is significant. It means there are shared ways of seeing these themes, even if not everyone picks the exact same set of goals. What is really cool is that this research provides a framework for how to actually study art in relation to these global goals. They've created a dataset and a way to analyze it that can help researchers, educators, and even curators select artworks that best represent certain SDGs. This can be incredibly useful for raising awareness and sparking conversations. Now, like any study, there are some things to keep in mind. The images were photographs, not the real murals on the walls, so they might have missed some of the impact of seeing the art in its actual environment. Also, the participants were mostly from Portugal and Brazil, so people from other cultures might see things differently. And finally, they looked at what SDGs were represented, but not necessarily how they were represented, for example, whether the art showed a problem related to an SDG or a solution. But overall, this is a groundbreaking study. It shows that street art isn't just decoration. It is a powerful visual language that can communicate complex ideas, including our global goals for a better world. It provides a solid foundation for future research, whether it is exploring how emotions are linked to these SDG themes in art, or how art can be used even more effectively to drive real world change. What do you think? Have you ever seen a piece of street art that you felt strongly connected to one of the SDGs? Let me know in the comments below. And if you found this breakdown interesting, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science explained simply, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.